we'll start whenever you're ready. I'll just say the intro stuff and then we'll go from there. Let me know when.
Go.
All right, everybody who is listening, welcome to The Subject of the Unconscious, a podcast where Isolda Alvarez and I try to have an informal but serious conversation about Lacanian psychoanalysis and the way that it affects different things, the clinic, our lives as subjects, other stuff as well. And if you listen to our last podcast, you might remember that at the very end, Isolda suggested that a good topic for our next episode would be the topic of nonsense. We were talking about diagnosis, and somehow we happened onto that topic. And it was near the end of our allotted recording time. And Isolda said, let's pick that one up next. And I said, sure, let's go ahead and do that. Nonsense seems like a wonderful topic. So Isolda, let's start with you. Why did you pick the topic of nonsense to be covered on the podcast?
Well, hello to everybody. Neil, yes, it's true. It's my fault. I did that. That idea came because we were talking about diagnosis. And one of the things that we said is that a diagnosis might be helpful, creating sense and giving meaning to certain experiences that we pass through our lives. I don't know, when you're like super sad or like when you're anxious or when you don't understand what's happening. And I was thinking the train of thought that I remember is that, yes, the diagnosis makes sense of whatever can be like happening to you. But there is always another part in human existence in general that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I think that that's a big chunk of what psychoanalysis is about and how we deal in our daily living and our practice with those things that they don't make any sense in our lives. And it's not our work to make that things kind of pass through them and make them like make sense. Completely the opposite is how we deal with our own nonsense. That's the train of thoughts. Oh, next episode we'll talk about the nonsense. I don't know. I want to know your nonsense thoughts about it, Neil.
Sure. I will do my best to provide some sensical thoughts on nonsense here. So, when you were describing what you just did, one of the thoughts that came to my mind is that when people come to a psychoanalyst, they're could do it for a lot of different reasons, but chances are one way we could describe the reason that people go to the trouble of finding a psychoanalyst, making an appointment, showing up, is that there is something in their experience that does not make sense to them. And sometimes they can tell you that very quickly, right? They'll come right in and they'll be like, hey, I keep on doing this thing over and over and over. I try to not do it. I know I shouldn't do it. I know that when I do it, it has a really negative effect on my life, on my relationship, my body, my finances, all that stuff. And yet I cannot seem to help myself. It just doesn't make any damn sense why I keep doing this, but I do. Sometimes people will say that, but other times they don't. Sometimes you have to arrive at whatever that nonsensical thing is through a different route, a kind of often circuitous route where people come in and they say, I'm here because I'm having trouble with my job, or I'm feeling more anxious about something or whatever. And they talk about that, and maybe that leads to some other stuff. And eventually you get to the nonsense thing. But the way I would describe the nonsense that I think we're talking about here is that there are things in our lives that it does not make sense that we do them, that we feel them, that we think them, all that stuff. It like resists sense. There's certain things that
Yes.
if somebody says, hey, I keep on doing this thing, and the reason that they're doing it is because they don't know something, and then you tell them what they need to know, and then they stop doing it because you made sense of it for them, that can happen. But then there are other things that process just doesn't happen for. that no matter what you do, no matter how many different ways you explain stuff or how many things you link it to from your past, still doesn't make sense. And I think that's what we're talking about. Would you say that that's correct, or have I missed something?
Completely agree with you on that, Neil. I think that you have different lines of work in our practice. It depends of each case, as we said before. But if we talk in more general ways, it's true. I found myself with the same experience. There's some patients that came to see us and they kind of have like pinpointed already, but this doesn't make any sense. And I keep doing this and I can't stop it. And there are others that part of our work, part of our intervention is precisely to kind of extract that point. First to identify it and then to extract it. And it doesn't have to be something like huge, or a big aha moment, nothing of that. It might be something very subtle, a detail. But I think it's important to put it out there because I think I said it before. A good way for me to try to grasp what we do, what we try to do as psychoanalysts, is that we work with the glitch in the system. So we're very used to the idea that consciousness and rationality is our best guide. And the best way to make good decisions or make good calls is like thinking through stuff and elaborating. I'm not saying that it's not the way. What I'm saying is that there are other ways too. So I wanted to talk about the nonsense because I think many times the part that doesn't make any sense about ourselves is precisely the part that escapes the diagnosis. It's
I
precisely the part that we can't grasp, even if we put a label on it.
so I think maybe this is an important distinction to make as well. When somebody comes to psychoanalysis, my thoughts are that we don't start with the nonsense usually. That's not
Mm.
the thing that we go right to. What I think happens instead is that people talk about their lives, they talk about what they're going through, they talk about their dreams maybe. They can talk about anything. That's kind of one of the beautiful things about psychoanalysis is you talk about what you want to talk about. The analyst doesn't tell you talk about this specific thing or whatever, or don't talk about something. It's just free associate. Say what comes into your mind and try not to censor yourself too much. So when people do this, I believe that there are things that don't make sense at the beginning that they do make sense out of as they move through the process. There is a process of this was a mystery, this was weird, I did not understand anything about this part of my experience. And through talking about it, they do make sense of it. And that sense making process can produce what we would call a therapeutic effect. People
Hmm.
people feel better. It's nice, right? That does happen. Sometimes I think that there are some patients who come to me and they get that and then they say this is what I wanted, I'm done. I'm out of here. That this has helped me out. However, when people do that, a lot of times they end up coming back because
Yes.
therapeutic effects don't last because they don't get to this nonsensical thing that is resistant to our attempts to make sense of it. And that's still there, lurking, you know, somewhere, and it makes itself known at some point. So you earlier you called it an aha moment. People can have those in their psychoanalytic process. They have this moment of epiphany,
Mm.
insight, and it feels kind of incredible. And you think, wow, this is why I was here. This is why I bothered to do this whole psychoanalysis thing. This is what I was here to figure out. And like I said, some people leave, some people continue. But regardless of whether they leave or continue, that feeling that people get when things sort of fall into place and where sense was lacking, now it's present, well, that only lasts for so long. It doesn't stick around forever.
Yeah, or might resolve one issue, but not the cause of that issue. So if you have a leak in your house, you can like make arrangements one part of the pipe, but if you don't pay attention to the origin of the thing, this leak is going to keep happening and appearing in another part, another side of the pipe as well. So I think what you're saying is quite accurate, and patients kind of give testimony of this all the time. I felt better in this area. This has been resolved, but there is still something that doesn't make any sense for me because I'm doing this and I'm thinking about that or I'm feeling this. So I think that a dimension that psychoanalysis introduces that I found like fascinated and still fascinated by it is this differentiation in between making sense and logic. Certain things might not have and they won't make any sense at all. And it's not even worthy to try to track any sense because by their nature, it won't make any sense, but they have a logic. And I think that's part of the treatment as well. There are many moments in life, things that happens to people or choices that we make that they don't make any sense, but they have a logic. And in a psychoanalytic experience, that's a huge part of what we do. We track or trace the logic of it. Not just if it makes sense or not, but there are certain elements that you can put together and you will find a logic even if it doesn't make any sense. And it's very complicated slash funny because usually we're not used to think about these terms. We usually try to bring meaning to everything, and it's in the nature of human beings. We see a cloud or we see shapes in a cloud. It's just a cloud, but it's the nature of our language. So sometimes it's difficult to draw the line in between what makes sense as a phenomenon and what might not make sense, but it has a logic.
Yes, I think that's very important. And I don't know if I can put this into words in a way that will make sense here because I don't want to get into too many details of this, but you and I have both gone through psychoanalysis and had our own experiences as
Yes.
analysans, right? We've gone and we've run up against certain things in our own subjective experience. We've encountered our own nonsensiness, I think is how I'm
Yes.
trying to get at this. And it's interesting. And speaking for myself here, again, in a very general, non-specific way, I do know that through my own experience of analysis, I did encounter this thing that I kept on doing that I didn't want to do, that I could very consciously recognize when I do this, my life doesn't work very well, right?
Okay.
It doesn't make, but I can't seem to, even with that knowledge, which does make sense, it was this thing that would kind of discover new ways to happen despite my attempts to prevent it from
Mm-hmm.
happening, right? Like it's like I thought I could be really smart about this. I thought I could be really diligent. I thought I could make choices in a way that could kind of outflank, outrun this
Uh-huh.
tendency. And could I do that for to some degree? Yes, I could. I could prevent myself. I could slow it down. I could maybe make the duration in between incidents longer, that sort of thing. But eventually, I'd do it again. I'd just keep doing it.
Yes.
And through the process of analysis, there was this construction that occurred, which it's like, yes, it doesn't make sense that you would do that. There's no way to look at that and think like, well, that's a really good idea. You should keep doing that. You doing that is a very sensical decision. That didn't happen. But what did happen is that I was able to put together, there was a logic to what I was doing. And this is the thing that I think I have a hard time putting into words. Maybe you can help me. This difference between what we mean when we say logic and sense. Logic is something in the way that I'm using the term that operates kind of beyond sense,
Yes.
right? You can look at it and you can't apply a sort of like meaning to it, but there's an understanding sort of that occurs maybe. And I don't know if that's quite right or quite wrong as I say those words, but that's a really important thing. And it's a pretty long-term project, I think, for most people. It certainly has been in my own case, that constructing that logic is not something that goes very quickly. And
Mm.
once that logic is constructed, it's not like you're better. It's not like I stopped doing the thing. All right. That's not a cure in the sense that it's no longer a problem. but the construction of the logic certainly changes the way that I related to this nonsensical thing that I did. It's something about the way that I had it as a thing that's going to be a part of my life, whether I want it to or not, shifted as a result of this. So again, I know that that was kind of, not saying a whole lot of specific things about it, but I don't know if that communicates or transmits anything that makes sense to you or puts words into a configuration that you would like to respond to.
I think it's beautiful, this exercise, because we are trying to make an episode of a podcast about the nonsense. And precisely, we are all the time checking upon ourselves if we are making sense, which is, it shows the tendency. And despite your doubts, I think it makes sense what you said, because it's not the same when you're trying to look and search for the meaning, what it means to do this, what I did this, and what it means. And we can get lost very easily, and all the meanings that we could attach to a thought, a feeling, or an event, or a behavior. I think that when we talk about the logical aspect of the thing, more than meaning, as you said, beyond the meaning, it's more like the function. What function does that have? When you are aware of the logic of your mind, so to speak, what triggers what, why you feel this way when you're confronted with these, what are the things that are unbearable for you, what are the things that you're kind of open to deal with or review your ethical principles, that gives you kind of like a map, a logical map of how your mind works, what your subjectivity is made of, and how it's functioning, what connections you make, even if they don't make any sense, which is the point, right? Why is this connected to this? I don't know. I received someone last week, and for her, staying is staying suffering. That doesn't make any sense. Exactly, your face. Exactly. But when she started talking about their family, their mom, the ta 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 ta, that was the interpretation that she made about her mom.
Mm.
Mom stayed in whatever she had to stay, but suffering. So for my patient, staying is equal to suffering. That doesn't make any sense, but it has a logic related to her experiences, her subjectivity, and her singular way to interpret whatever the mom did or didn't do. So I agree with you. I think in a psychoanalytic experience, you pass through this exercise of going beyond meaning and kind of start, if I can say that, to be aware of how certain elements function in you. So if I think about this and I feel anguish, that is related to these other issues, not because it means this or the other thing. It's because it's related to these other elements. It's like you have a lot of pieces of a huge puzzle and you're moving around these pieces to see where like it fits. And even if there are pieces that they don't fit or you have empty spaces, it's okay. It's how it is. So it's kind of be aware, but also kind of sort of make peace with your own nonsense. Because most of the time we're trying to, this is going to sound weird, but to make sense about ourselves to ourselves.
Yeah, that's correct, I think. So you mentioned that this came out of our episode on diagnosis, and you mentioned how a lot of times diagnosis makes sense. Another way to perhaps say that is that diagnosis provides a meaning, a structure of meaning, where somebody would say, I do this because I am diagnosed with this thing, because I have ADHD. That's why I can't do these certain things or why they're difficult for me to do. And it explains maybe why I think the way that I think. And people continue to use these different things to kind of construct this like ever expanding kind of like crystallization of meaning. It explains something, I guess. So now I'm going to jump tracks here in an attempt to talk about the idea of logic that is beyond meaning, or logic providing something that we might call a kind of understanding, but a kind of understanding that you can't make meaning from. So light waves. For a long time, people thought light was a wave, and then other people were like, no, it's a particle. And the thing is, that it couldn't be both, right? There was a whole
Yes.
big argument around this thing. So light can't be a particle and a wave, but the logic is that it is. There's a logic to light. And the logic is that it's two things where everything else is one thing or the other, but this thing is somehow both. That doesn't really make a lot of sense, but there is a logic to it, I think. But it's the kind of thing that makes you, it like arrests our tendency to make meaning from it.
Hmm.
It kind of leaves you in this place. You're like, what do I do with that? How can that be? The way we relate to that logic is not the same way, I think, that we would relate to meaning, which is a
Uh-huh.
different thing altogether. So, like I said, I don't know what you will think about that comparison, but I'm interested to hear what you think about it.
I think this kind of differentiation that we're trying to make in between when something has certain logic, but it doesn't make any sense. We could also put it on terms knowledge versus satisfaction. Because I think that when we create meaning and we try to make sense of things, one of the things that we ended up creating is knowledge. And it's very important to know. I'm not saying that it's not important, but I think that beyond knowing why we're doing this or why we're thinking this or why we can't stop doing certain things or whatever, which is related to meaning and sense, I think the nonsense part is more related to satisfaction. There's something that is satisfied in ourselves that we don't know why and we don't know what sense or what meaning that might have, but we get the satisfaction. And it's precisely the problem that we encounter when we work with repetition. You were giving an example. You were saying, well, when I can like stop doing this and then I'll do it, but I think it's going to be better. And I think about it and I kind of like go out, the possible results and try to get this result or the other one and da. Yeah, there's a certain knowledge there about your tendency. I have certain knowledge about my own tendency, my own repetitions. Yes, but even when you know it, sometimes it's not enough. So the work in psychoanalysis, I think, in what we aim to is yes, we elaborate and we construct, we make constructions and we construct new type of knowledge. It's true. We elaborate and we create knowledge and we kind of know a little bit better why we do this or why we enjoy this or why we suffer in this way. But beyond that knowledge, following the trace of the logic side, it helps us to grasp what is the satisfaction at stake. What is being satisfied there? And it's not a satisfaction, Neil, in the sense that, oh my God, I got the ice cream, I'm so satisfied. It's a satisfaction that is quite ironic, is super weird, is something that sometimes you don't even want to consciously, but there is something in your own way of being or exist that gets satisfaction from this or that. And I think, at least to me, is very helpful to put like knowledge and meaning together and then put logic on the other side. And then even beyond logic, this type kind of satisfaction. So when I'm listening to someone, one of the things that helps me to guide or orient my listening is precisely what is being satisfying. What is the satisfaction at stake? I don't know if this makes sense for you.
It does, I think, to a point. And what you're getting at, I believe, is very important as well. So I'm going to try to redescribe what I think you just said in my own words here. When we talk about the logic, it's a logic of satisfaction. There is a form of satisfaction that is occurring here that is logical, even though it doesn't make sense in the traditional way or the maybe more commonplace way that it would if we when we use that term. We all have things that we get satisfaction from that make our lives difficult.
Yes.
And there's certain things that we can change about that, I think, right? When I talked earlier about the therapeutic effects and whatnot, there are some times in psychoanalysis or even just outside psychoanalysis, something can happen in your regular life where somebody can say something to you and the words have an effect on your body and they change it. I'll give you an example here. I read this in a story once about this guy who was, I think, in his early 20s, and he was working like three different jobs because he needed to make money, and it's really hard to make money. So he's like doing this and he's doing that and some other thing too. And he was getting satisfaction from working. It was an ironic satisfaction because it was also, of course, very difficult to work three jobs and not have any time, so
Hmm.
on and so forth. But there was a satisfaction there. And then he had a little brother, I think. And one day the little brother said something along the lines of, "Why is making money more important to you than spending time with me?" And those words changed it. It couldn't satisfy him in the same way that it once did. He could still make money, and making money was still something that I'm sure offered some form of satisfaction, but not the same kind of satisfaction
Hmm.
because of the effect of words. So his brother, in that example that I just gave, produced a therapeutic effect, I think, right?
Mm.
And so you can see that kind of stuff happen, but there's still going to be something else there beyond all this that is in play in different ways. And so I think what happens in psychoanalysis is a clinical practice when it goes on for long enough, which is a totally indeterminate amount of time. You can't say what enough will be. I think that people start to have this logic become something that is present for them in a way that it was absent before. And when that happens, there's this I don't even know how to put this into words, so I apologize for how much I'm like pausing and starting and stopping here, but something happens where it's like, okay, I can't get rid of this thing.
Mm.
It's here. It's a part of me. And there's no getting a divorce. This thing is like a partner that I am stuck with.
Yes.
This nonsensical stuff. I can't just set it down and walk away from it. It's not going to work. It'll always find a way back into my life. And so there's another thing that I think can happen. And to put it in the most general way, you find a way to have it be a part of your life. And it doesn't make it awesome that it's a part of your life, but in a way, you can start to kind of use it.
Yes.
And but it's an ironic sort of usefulness. So you talk about ironic satisfaction
Yeah.
that people get from their symptoms and their nonsense. Well, yeah, there can also be maybe produced for some folks an ironic kind of usefulness that comes from these same things.
Yeah, I think the result, if that is even like possible to name it like that, um, of an analysis in which you kind of grasp this thing in your own experience, is precisely that one. Is you're not just like aware, you give it a use. So it's true what you're saying. There's no way for you to separate from your own nonsense, but there's something to do about it. Not to do in the sense that how to do this and how to do that, but it's kind of you get satisfied in another ways with that, and not it doesn't make you suffer that much because we can talk here in broad in general terms, but these things are causes like humongous suffering for real. I mean, people like lost their lives, their relationships, they have issues in their jobs. It's something that actually could make traumatic events in your lives and also open up like a way of despair is how you say, like
Yeah,
anguish, and because you don't have any control on it. I think that yes, the work in the Lacanian orientation is try to not just make you aware of this, which is related to this knowledge, but also to kind of use the satisfaction that is part of your core, the core of your existence, and put it into motion in another ways, not just the ways that you were trying to resolve it, because I think that's part of the problem. Many people try to resolve it as if this source of satisfaction is like something to fix.
absolutely.
And I think that's part of the work. The work is trying to introduce another dimension. Maybe what if it's not something that you have to fix and more than something that you can give it another use? So the invention of the another use that you're going to extract satisfaction from in any ways, I think that's the beauty of the analytic invitation. And it's something that beyond the changes that we talk already about it, all the changes that have been happening in psychoanalysis since Freud, is something that Freud also puts out there. When he started listening to these women and saying, like, well, there's something more. This doesn't make any sense, medically speaking. It must have another logic. And then says, like, whoa, wait, there's something, some sort of satisfaction here that is happening in another level with another words. He kind of tried to introduce, at least was the first one, that said, like, what if there's something beyond the pleasure principle that is governing human behavior and human choices? Then Lacan and other like authors or psychoanalysts have introduced another perspective too, especially Lacan, when he says, like, well, maybe there is another type of satisfaction. And the idea that there's other type of satisfaction that is on the level of the unconscious actually is what guide our work. Because there you have the meaning, which is important, and how we give meaning and kind of we create certain knowledge about what is happening to us. There's also the logic and how we ended up in the places or positions that we ended up, but also what satisfaction was running behind of all this and what I'm going to do with it. Because that's the big questions towards the end.
That's great. I have two thoughts that I wanted to offer in response to that. So, one way to describe a shift that can come about through psychoanalysis is to say that there's this nonsensical thing. I'm going to call it a symptom, a nonsensical symptom that people have in their lives. And they're kind of doing battle with it. It's this thing that they're going to beat, that they're going to win in whatever competition they're in with it by getting cured, by getting fixed, whatever, by making sense of it. They're going to win. And just that style of relating to something, for some things that works. Like there's certain problems we have in our life and we can make them go away. We can make some problems go away by doing stuff or not doing stuff. And there are other problems like the ones we're talking about, these kind of nonsensical problems that you can't. And I think in psychoanalysis, what happens when you transition from trying to make sense of it, doing battle with it by trying to make sense of it, to grasping something of the logic, you stop doing battle. And it starts to be this thing that you work into your life in a different way that is not about winning or losing or about defeating it or getting it out. It's about, okay, I'm going to create a way of doing this thing that works for me, whatever that is. And I know that that's super general. So that's the first thought I had. The second thought I had is that one of the things that can happen, because people talk about psychoanalysis takes forever and ever and ever,
Yeah.
you know, and one of the reasons that I think that that's true, that it does take a really long time, is because our tendency to get caught up in making meaning of our experience can actually prevent us from encountering the thing that we can't make meaning of, prevent us from encountering our own nonsensical stuff. And then if we do encounter it, the project of trying to make it mean something, of trying to produce some kind of meaning, some kind of sense, no, I am going to make this make sense. I'm going to figure out how I can do that. I know that it might be really hard, but I'm going to find a way, right? Like that. That's part of why the process takes so long, is because a lot of times folks got to go through that and it's not going to work. They're going to fail. And maybe those failures are actually often, I think they're very productive. Like they're really interesting. The fact that people try to make sense of something and they don't make sense of it, but they end up making sense of something else. And it's like a kind of a bonusy sort of thing that happens. But the longer I think that a person tries to make sense of something that you can't make sense of, and they avoid confronting the logic of it, the more they're not going to confront that logic. And until they do that, they're not going to be able to do the other thing that I described, where they have that shift from battle / make meaning of this to understand something, grasp something of the logic, and create a way that it can be in my life. So that's,
Yeah.
I don't know, that's two ideas. I don't know if they do anything for
I
you.
completely agree, especially with the second idea, because I think it summarized very well. It gives kind of a really good explanation why sometimes certain analyses they last the amount of time that they last. And it's not about that the analysis has to last this amount of time or this another one. I think is a quite singular process. But as you said, the tendency is to create meaning, and it's a really good defense against the nonsense, if I'm following your last point. And it is the major defense. I mean, so I try to work on this and work on that. And I think, and I think, and I think, and to try to bring meaning and meaning. And that's the best protection that you have against your own nonsense. You made me remind a friend. We've been friends like for a very long time. And she's been doing analysis for a long time too after we became friends. And she was telling me the other day, like, she thinks every time that she goes to session and she plans what she's going to say and how she's going to say it. And she thinks she loves very much her thoughts passionately. So she thinks a lot. And she was telling me, she called me, she was like, Saul, my friends call me Saul, like, Saul, I can't stop like thinking before going to session. And what if it's not about thinking? Because I try to make sense of what I'm going to say ahead, right? And I was like, whoa, what if you don't think? And her answer was like, I can't imagine myself without thinking. Oh my God. So the whole thing about thinking is not just her relationship with her thoughts, is how she imagined herself too. Because you said something very important. Human beings were kind of wired in that way. We try to make sense of everything, but that gives certain sense of meaning to ourselves as well. Who I am, what it means to be this person or to act in this way, or the ethical principles that I have, or what I think is right or what I think is wrong. That brings meaning to my own existence.
Yeah.
And being confronted with your own existence might not have that meaning, or that meaning might not be that fixed. It's quite scary sometimes. I mean, it's delicious at the end of the journey, but it might be very scary. And these friends ask me, like, Sol, how am I gonna do that? You ask me like not to think? I said, well, give it a try and see what happened. And she was like, I'm having a panic attack. I can't do that. But it's this thing about knowledge. She's very passionate about knowledge, of course. I was asking her, what did you think you like that much about thinking? Thinking. She goes like, oh my God, I don't know. I just like it. She doesn't know why, but that's the type of satisfaction that is behind this whole thing. And it's quite in tune what you were just like saying, how this thinking or this idea of meaning might be a defense
Hmm.
against being confronted with your own nonsense.
It's really interesting to me for me to think about this stuff and to hear you saying the things that you're saying because you're describing your friend and the people who are really good at thinking about their experience a lot and making insights and making meaning about stuff and so on and so forth. Because when I'm saying this thing too, I'm describing about how some people in analysis can do
Yeah.
whatever. No shocker. I'm talking a lot about me most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time. This is stuff that I've been through. I know very well how appealing and how satisfying it is to make meaning of things that are happening in our lives. And I can say that to myself. I can say that to other people. You can say that to your friends that that's an impediment to what psychoanalysis might eventually offer them. They can understand that in a way, but you actually need the experience, your own totally unique to you experience of coming into contact with this in order to figure out whatever it is that you're going to figure out, I think. And that's a really important point here. People can read a lot about psychoanalysis. They can listen to podcasts about psychoanalysis and hear all this stuff, and maybe it sparks something for them. Maybe they find it very applicable to their own experiences and all that. But it's only the experience of analysis that well, I mean, I shouldn't say it's only that. There's probably other things that people can do that maybe have this effect as well. But psychoanalysis is one of those things that you got to do it. You got to go through it in order to get what I think you and I are trying to say something about, which is an experience of your nonsensicalness.
Mm, yes. And maybe that's why psychoanalysis has been defined many times and through history as an experience. Maybe we should do the next episode about this, about why psychoanalysis is an experience.
I think that sounds like a very interesting idea. So next time, if you come back and listen to us again, you'll hear something about psychoanalysis being an experience. This has been The Subject of the Unconscious. My name is Neil Gorman. I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Isolda Alvarez, and we have tried to speak about nonsense, and hopefully you're not too dissatisfied with the result, whoever you are. Um,
Or
so
maybe they're satisfied with the nonsense that we said.
who knows, right? Like, I'm struggling with how to put a bow on the end of this episode here. I'm trying. I keep on trying to put the bow on and it just keeps on moving. I can't quite get it.
It's a Lacanian episode then. We cut it off and that's it.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully we'll be in your ears again soon. Till then, take care.